100 years ago, Rice County was settling in to celebrate the new year. 1924 was about to take over to 1925. 100 years before then, Rice County was still entirely settled by the Dakota people and the fur traders who formed bonds with them. In 1824, Alexander Faribault had not yet set foot in the town or county he would be instrumental in creating. The coming of the new year then, as now, was a time of reflection. In hindsight, we might also see how those reflections foreshadowed events to come, events already in motion. What events are in motion now that to future historians will seem glaringly clear, but to which we are none the wiser? That is what we are here to explore today. Welcome to this Rice County History New Year special. I'm Sam Temple. I'm joined by Logan Ledman. We do local history together, and we're very excited to ring in this new year by looking to the New Years of yesteryear. Logan, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Sam. I'm coming to you live from the balmy port city of New York, and I'm thrilled to be joining you on this adventure today. For the viewer, I've not been clued in at all on what Sam and I are about to talk about, so I'll be joining these questions and with exactly as much information as you have at home. So let's hop in together and see what Sam's got in store for us.
Yes, absolutely. Now, this is not an exhaustive piece of research. This was me getting distracted in the local history newspaper archives. So this was just me picking up what I could from the various New Year's celebrations that I could find recorded on the digital archive. So there's lots more to say. There's lots more to tell. This is just a fun exercise. This is what Logan and I find fun. So thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. And first, no conversation about celebrations can begin without talking about the indigenous people of this land, the Wakbekute band of the Dakota Nation. And for indigenous people, the passage of time was marked generally by the summer solstice and the winter solstice, the longest day of the year and the shortest day of the year. So the winter solstice, of course, there would be celebrations for many indigenous people, especially the Dakota, Lakota Nation. This winter solstice for them is a time of storytelling and reflection, rather than there being any particular rituals or dances. It would be more a time of leisure, of relaxation, of playing games and telling stories. And that's one of the universal things. For another project that I was doing recently, Logan, I researched these different solstice cultures around the world, and what they would do for those celebrations. And it really is a universal thing. It just depends on what side of the hemisphere you're on as to when you're celebrating what. But the idea of gathering on the darkest day of the year and telling stories and finding community is really, really common. And so the solstice is December 21st. New Year's, of course, in our calendar is December 31st. So they tend to fall into the same thing. And as cultures, intermingled, a lot of those celebrations really paired with each other and became one. Logan, got any solstice celebrations? Got any solstice knowledge you want to drop?
Well, it's just interesting that you talk about that, thinking about the way that our current, what we call the holiday season, operates. It does operate as a period of time, an actual, like a period of celebration rather than an event on one day. Mm-hmm. I think there's in some places that is more typical, and in some contexts it is a single, like you say, the solstice day is the actual event, but then around that there's a period of celebration. And I mean, the context there, of course, is that when you talk about gathering, I think this is true of the Dakota people as well, but any kind of gathering centered on an event, although it may technically be centered around the solstice itself, the act of gathering for hundreds of thousands of years was not a one day. It wasn't you fly in on the weekend and you fly out. This was people traveling on foot or horseback, in contexts where that was possible, for weeks at a time in order to be with family, with extended family, with in the case of the Dakota, an extended family that included hundreds of people, if not thousands. So um, it's understanding that these periods of reflection and celebration were in some ways monumental. They were accomplishments of bringing people from all over into one place uh, to simply be together. And that's something that is different from our holiday season now, is that it's often really, really centered on a specific family unit,
Mhm.
and um, and it happens and then it's over. Um, so yeah, just interesting to think about the way that even though this period in general has for a long, long time and in many different contexts been a period of celebration, the way it presents itself is really different today than it would have been 200 years ago for the
Yeah.
people who were.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a lot of this comes from the newspaper archives, like I mentioned. And so we're going to cover the period from about 1857 to 1925. Uh, and what you see in the newspaper, I know you and I have discussed this, but for those who don't spend their time in the Minnesota Historical Society digital newspaper hub, uh, there's a lot of social notes in these things that aren't what we would consider today news, but it's more or less, not to be totally like, hey, history's hip and cool, but like a Facebook update of I'm traveling to San Francisco to visit family. I'm traveling to Hector to visit family. It a lot of things are there is Mr. and Mrs. Temple are visiting relatives in New Hampton, and they'll be moved, blah 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 blah. And that's the whole thing. They don't explain, necessarily who they're visiting. Sometimes they say to visit relatives or spend the new year with relatives. Um, Part of that is just to inform people, like in your social circle, like, hey, I know you're also subscribed to the Faribault Republican, so I'm letting my friends know who read the Faribault Republican why I'm out of town. Or we will talk about one character we'll focus on at the end, John Lick. And At a certain point, there was a scarlet fever quarantine in his house. And the purpose of that is not, oh, he's sick, better be careful, or, oh, he's sick, he's going to die. No, it was just, hey, if I don't answer my door, it's because I'm quarantining, that sort of thing. Here's why I'm not showing up to work. Here's why I'm not at the function here, all that stuff. So as we see through these newspapers in the 1870s, it's much more common to be like, Mr. Temple went to Waterville to visit friends. Mr. Temple went to St. Paul for the weekend. And then you get to even the 1920s, and it's Mr. Temple is visiting family in California, something that would have just not been feasible unless you were either very, very rich or kind of stupid. You wouldn't be making trips like that on the regular. Um, so, speaking of newspapers in the 1850s, let us check in with an old friend of ours, one Rodney Mott, one of the founding figures of Faribault and Rice County. He started out as a newspaperman, as the editor of the Rice County Herald, and he has this message to his readers for New Year's. The carrier of the Herald, the Rice County Herald, offers a copy of Mrs. Stowe's last work, Dread, also The Hunter's Feast by Captain Reed, for the best original poem appropriate for a carrier address. It must not consist less than 50 words and not over 100 lines. The committee to award the prize composes of messengers George Batchelder, Levi Nutting, and C.C. Perkins. So, couple familiar names in that bunch, but they wanted a poem to be awarded for the coming new year, specifically, presumably around abolition, which was a lot of people's, main political, main moral cause of the time. I
Yeah,
did not find the poem, unfortunately.
that's too bad. What was that's probably a Harriet Beecher Stowe. book that they're referring to there?
Yeah. Dread.
Never
Uh,
heard of it.
Dread spelled like Dred Scott.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've never heard of that, and I've never heard of the Hunter's Feast. So, Logan, if you can write me a poem that consists not less than 50 and not over 120 lines, that would be appropriate for a carrier address. Please let me know, and maybe I can track down those books for you.
I must say, I need to. Step one for me is going to be figuring out what a carrier address is.
A carrier would be the mail carrier, is my understanding.
So, do we think maybe the idea was that this would be a poem that the mail carrier would recite as he's delivering his mail, or
No, it would be
it's just that's the structure?
well, because they have books as like I think you can get multiple things from the mail carrier, is my understanding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is my understanding. But mail and newspaper delivery has changed a lot over the span of just what we're looking at today. So if someone knows better than we do, let us know. But yeah, my understanding is the carrier is literally just the person or the company delivering the stuff.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because imagine the newspaper today for New Year's sending out to readers a couple of the best books of the year and saying, please write us a poem based on these books. Assuming you have the time to read both of these books and then write 120 lines of poetry.
I think, let me clarify, I read it as to the best poem gets these books.
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
it's
So
it's a contest.
it's a contest. Okay. So write us the greatest poem, 120 lines maximum.
Hmm.
You get two books. And this is, remind me of the year?
1856.
1856. So there's almost nothing in this town.
Yeah.
I think the libraries has there's either a library in somebody's house.
Right. The closest thing is likely a library if there's like a government building in town. Otherwise, it would probably be at Batchelder's personal library in his law office, or Alexander Faribault's house has a collection of books. That's probably it at this point.
So this is, and 1856, Minnesota is not a state yet. This is still considered to the rest of the country. This is the frontier,
Yes.
and one of the priorities that this town leader is
Hmm.
spending his time inculcating is this kind of culture,
Yeah.
this relationship to the literature that's being published out east, the social causes that are important in the Northeast at the time, and not only saying, we as a newspaper institution, our job is to spread the literature. It's also to ask the general populace to create art,
Hmm.
to create culture in this place.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what Rodney Mott saw his role as
Yes.
in
And he
community
was an
development.
educator throughout a lot of his career as well. He would go on to do a lot of things there. I was just on, and it'll be coming out around the time that this video is released. I was just on Trek Through Time, which is the Northfield Historical Society podcast, talking about John North. John North also at this point is a founding figure in Rice County. He was one of the people who platted out Faribault before heading up north to plat out and found Northfield. But one of the first things built there under his watch was the Lyceum Society, the Lyceum building. And I know Tom Buckham was a member of that. I'm betting Rodney Mott was, but I don't know off the top of my head. But that is another example of a very intentional literary social culture that is being curated by these founders. Rodney Mott, Alexander Faribault, John North, all of these people had a very specific vision of what this community ought to be, and of what a good community is. So here's just a small example of them doing that and trying to set out as we begin the new year. We can't spend this much time on every news story we have here. Some of them are going to be more question marks. In fact, we're about to jump forward almost half a century.
Okay.
We are jumping to 1898 now. 1898. The young ladies of 7th Street received callers on New Year's Day at the home of Donald Grant. It was a merry crowd. Uh, Donald Grant, one of the great industrialists of Minnesota and frankly, Faribault and frankly, Minnesota history. Big railroad tycoon, dabbled in a lot of things, was very Faribault centric. He was mayor of Faribault for a long time. So I just thought you would enjoy seeing that. I have no idea what the young ladies of 7th Street means.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if that's the same. Is there a street in Faribault today that is likely, obviously there's a 7th Street in Faribault. Do you think it's the same one? And then the next step would be to see if there's any institutions
That's
that are on 7th Street or would have been on 7th Street.
that's what I was trying to find.
Probably like a prep school or something like that.
Or I was thinking even St. Mary's, but I couldn't find a street address quickly enough. Again, this is a very casual piece of research. If we were turning this into a documentary, I would have, figured out for sure what that meant. But I also thought this is exactly the kind of thing. We are basically just recording a conversation that you and I would have not recorded, Logan. And it would be here's this weird sentence. That's fun. Anyway. So maybe eventually we'll dig deeper on that. But I thought you would appreciate the appearance of one Donald Grant.
Yeah.
2 years later, 1900, New Year's Day started in New Year's Day started in with a mild quality of weather.
Okay.
That was the extent of the weather report. Really not telling us anything.
Mild quality. I guess that's nice.
In 1901, the following year, we have watch night service held in the cathedral New Year's night. Have you heard of these watch night services?
I heard of it.
Yeah, it's so a lot of it started in religion was you ring in the new year with like a midnight mass, essentially, that some people, will have on Christmas, Catholic specifically for the mass. But the New Year's, they have these watch night parties. And for very devout individuals, that would be, a traditional religious ceremony. Maybe it would be followed by a meal. But as time goes on, watch night services also became just the name for gatherings of, Mr. Temple hosted a watch night party at his house New Year's Eve. Guests were glad. There's a lot of these things. Like I mentioned with those social notes in the newspaper, there's a lot of this person hosted this people. Real tricky if you had to bail on one party to choose another party, because they might read the next day, Mr. Ledman went to Mr. Temple's party and not mine, something like that. Presumably someone had some control over what was reported in your movements.
I would say, is there a journalist going to every party?
I have to assume this would be fun to look into. That's one thing we haven't done a lot on is the history of press and the actual workings of press locally. But
Awesome.
yeah, that would be fun to look into. But I assume this is like a Facebook post. You write a notice to the newspaper of here's what I did.
What about the
Yeah. So we're gonna go outside Faribault now. We're looking a little bit more throughout Rice County. In 1903, a report from Nerstrand. The dance given here on New Year's Eve was financially a failure, but socially a grand success, which is not bad for a party.
No, most of the parties I've been to have been financial failures. And well, I won't say they've all been social successes, but maybe a mixed bag. But
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
What is the noun? Said again, it said a fair, a festival,
A dance.
a dance, right?
Mhm.
Interesting. Again, it just cool to think about. Not you said 1903.
That was 1903. Yeah.
1903, Nerstrand, not a lot of money, not a lot of capital in Nerstrand in 1903, but people are still willing to sink money, actual money. It sounds like unwisely, into gatherings, into being together and finding, reasons to celebrate. People think about the past as sunrise to sunset, farming and Occasionally, awful things happen to break up the monotony, but people were had the same interests as we have today. They like to have a nice time. They like to be around family most of the time, and they were willing to uh, spend hard-earned money and valuable time on being around other people and celebrating when the occasion called for it. So
Yeah.
even in this trend in 1903.
Yeah, absolutely. People in the past are just as human as we are, and everyone on Earth is just as human and experiencing that the joys, the highs and lows of what that means. Um, and what you might get is FOMO if you choose one party over the other, because that same New Year's,
Wow.
a concert was given by the Fleckenstein Stepan Orchestra and
Ooh.
the Faribault Cornet Band. Um, the Fleckenstein Stepan Orchestra will be coming up a lot. They were staples for a
Ah,
long time at these New Year's parties.
cool.
And they were just named after the people in the band. There was a lot of Fleckensteins and there was a Stepan. And they were just very talented local musicians. They were the Jive and Ivan and the Kings of Swing of their day. So let me tell you a little bit about this concert and this dance that was given. The Faribault Cornet Band. I have a cornet downstairs. Anyway, if I had thought ahead even a little bit, I would have had a prop ready to go, but I didn't. Um, the Faribault Cornet Band and the Fleckenstein Stepan. I got to decide if I'm doing Stepan or Stepan. I think it's Stepan. Fleckenstein Stepan Concert Orchestra have been holding nightly rehearsals preparing for the benefit concert and ball, which they will give at the Armory on New Year's Eve. The concert will consist of 8 numbers and will be interspersed with singing by the Faribault Male Quartet. The boys are giving the concert in order to raise funds with which to pay their hall rent for the coming season. It is hoped that all will turn out and give the organization their patronage. The band and orchestra will alternate numbers during the ball.
Sounds like a great time.
Yeah, 1903. They clearly are just doing this for the love of the music. But you know what? They need space to house an orchestra. Um, so like I said, it's a delightful thing. I know you're getting a lot more into music, Logan. Would you consider joining an orchestra or a band?
Uh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing more fun than um, making music with other people and and performing for an audience is great fun as well in any context, as you well know.
Yes.
Uh, so yeah, it's cool. What I liked about that um, is that there was no dressing up what they were asking for.
Yeah.
Saying like, we'd like some money so that we can continue performing and practicing
Hmm.
and renting our hall. And just saying to people, we think that would be a valuable use of your money would be for you to contribute to this community resource of
Hmm.
live music. Um, and yeah, I mean that's a way that arts organizations in uh, have they've made that plea for over a century in
Hmm.
this of saying, listen, we think this is a valuable asset to the community, um, and the community steps up and supports it.
Yeah. Uh, it must have worked because in 1904, there is a musical treat to music loving people. The concert and dance at the Armory New Year's Eve by the Faribault Band and the Fleckenstein Stepan Concert Orchestra was a rare treat. The members of both of these organizations are all old musicians, and they rendered the different selections in a manner that elicited hearty applause. Over 150 couples attended the concert, and most of these remained for the dance which followed. Over $60 was realized and will go to defray expenses the coming season.
There you go. Great. $60.
Yep,
60 good.
that'll go a long way in 1904. And there was also the return of the Nerstrand Party,
Uh-oh.
a successful New Year's party at J.G. Osmondson's. A New Year party was given by Mrs. J.G. Osmondson New Year's night to her intimate friends. A bountiful supper was served at 6:30, after which the evening was delightfully spent in playing cards and other amusements until 12 o'clock, when the guests departed for their respective homes, and the feeling that the evening was well spent, and wishing Mr. and Mrs. Osmondson a happy and prosperous New Year.
Okay, that is the article that convinces me that the hosts send in the article.
Yes. Yes. And maybe they intended more than just their intimate friends, because there's a lot of competition. Another dance was given New Year's Eve by the royal neighbors at the KP Hall, and it was a success in every way. About 125 couples in attendance who enjoyed the good time, and all pronounced the royal neighbors royal entertainers. The music for the dance was furnished by the Metropolitan Orchestra and was constantly applauded. In addition, at Shattuck, a very pleasant dancing party was given New Year's at Newhall's Hall when the Mary Ann's Club entertained the Wampanoags, what I take to be another fraternal organization. The hall was tastefully but simply decorated for the occasion, and a booth was arranged in one part of the hall where frappe was served. On this occasion, the ladies did the entertaining and arranged all the evening's amusements for their gentlemen friends. The dance was attended by a large number of guests and was a decided success. Logan, we've talked about dancing. You and I think we enjoy music. I don't think either of us are super swift on the soft shoe, you know? We're not huge dancers, you and I.
Sure.
Like
We're swayers.
Yeah.
Swayers.
Huh?
Accomplished swayers. I think few people can sway and bob better than you and I.
We can tap our toe with the best of them.
That's right. Not necessarily on beat, but the tapping itself is very skillful. But we're working on the rhythmic aspect of it.
So maybe you would want to ring in the new year with a different physical activity. Something maybe that you could do indoors in a cold Minnesota winter. I'm talking, of course, about bowling.
Yes.
Ole Olesen has made a score of 216 at the Empire Bowling Alleys.
Wow.
Will secure $5 New Year's morning unless someone beats his score before that time.
Unlikely. That's a great score.
Yeah. And it won't be the last time that bowling is brought up right now. And then, do you remember the Monday Club?
Vaguely, yeah. It was a ladies' society.
Yes, a ladies' society. The Anna Buckham was a member.
Yeah.
And would have been a member at this time. So we're in 1905 now. What do you think the Monday Club would do to ring in the new year? Any prediction?
Tea time.
Probably. There's probably some tea. Hey, Anna Buckham was a member. What were her interests?
Reading.
Yes.
I think she could dance.
Yeah. She liked music.
She was.
Let me tell you how her compatriots. Unless you have another funny thing to say about Anna Buckham's interests.
That's all I got.
Okay, great. Well, in 1905, the Monday Club met for its last meeting before the holidays with Mrs. Hudson Wilson last Monday afternoon. The afternoon was devoted to the following Shakespearean characters: The King by Mrs. Keys Hotspur, Mrs. Roseanne. Excuse me. Both Mrs. Keys Hotspur and Mrs. Roseanne covered the character of the king. Prince Hal was covered by Mrs. Haven. Falstaff was covered by Mrs. Mee Glendower and Mrs. Robinson. A comparison of King Henry and with the Merry Wives of Windsor was presented by Miss Barron, and it was a thoroughly enjoyable meeting. The next gathering will be on New Year's Day when the play will be presented.
The play?
I don't know if that means they're going to read one of those plays or if they are going to fully perform one of those plays. I assume they would just like assign the parts and read it around the table. But I don't know.
Sounds like the Monday Club.
Sounds like something Anna Buckham would enjoy.
Yeah.
In 1908, the Theta Gammas meet, also known as the Gophers. They held a meeting at the home of Fred Crawford on Friday evening to decide on their dances to be held during the holidays. A dance will be held on Christmas night, and all friends of the club are invited to attend. The dance will be held in Newell's Hall. On New Year's Eve, the annual Gopher celebration will take place in Oddfellows Hall. This is the 8th annual meeting of the club, and only members will attend. Extensive decorations will be put up in honor of the occasion, and a supper will be served during the evening. And they also had the Knickerbocker Club. The Knickerbocker Club met for the first time Monday evening in their coffee room over the post office, or their club rooms over the post office. Their rooms have been decorated and furnished, and a new piano installed. During the evening, a little play that will be given in the near future was rehearsed. On New Year's afternoon, the club will keep open house to their friends. So I swear I didn't just pick out theater things. There's just a lot of plays and a lot of dances and a lot of bowling going on.
And a lot of clubs.
A lot of social clubs.
Gilded Age into World War I is, in a lot of ways, the height of fraternal organizations of all kinds for men and women.
Yes.
There's so many. I mean, ethnic clubs, religious clubs, political clubs. I mean, engaging in politics at all really in this period was a social act that you would do that really functionally didn't look that different from hanging out with the Oddfellows Club or whatever. Everyone was a member of several different organizations. And so it's no surprise to see that integrating these fraternal organizations into the community celebrations that had already been going on was, there's already a tradition of dancing and of general celebration during the new year. No surprise to see these community institutions for men and women becoming a central part of how people celebrated in this period.
Yeah, and that there was a lot more communal buy-in to these things. It's not like this is one company or one organization doing all the work to put on an event that you then buy a ticket for. This is, we're all going to do a little work and we're all going to pitch in a little money to make this thing happen, which is really, really interesting to see how that has developed and changed over the years. Because there are still absolutely fraternal organizations in town, but it's been well reported that there's a lot of decline in membership. So that's just very, very interesting. Have you heard of a progressive dinner?
Is that like you start out eating appetizer, entree, dessert?
That is a reasonable piece of conjecture. A progressive dinner is when you do different courses at different locations.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
All that now.
Yeah, sure. But in this case, it would be your friends' houses.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So a novel dinner party was given at Seabury Hall on New Year's Eve. It was a progressive dinner given by Reverend Dr. and Mrs. Ten Broek and a bunch of other people. The last course of the dinner was served at the home of Reverend and Mrs. Gasor, where the remainder of the evening was spent watching for the new year. So again, a watch party at the end of a progressive dinner.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Also, I wonder, is that just happening in a street? Like you're going one house on street, or are you going across the entire town? Because that looks very different. That looks like if it's across the entire town, that's a group of people seeing and being a part of the whole community. Or is it a much more insular activity where it's just one group of people who maybe it's only people who are in a particular organization or associated, say, with one of the schools, living in the same neighborhood, or people of the same ethnic group. Interesting to think about what the implications would be, depending on how just that simple celebration would have been structured and how it would have operated.
Yeah. We're going to go over to your neck of the woods now to Dundas. This same year, there was also a concert given in Dundas.
Okay.
A delightful concert was given in Dundas New Year's night by the quartet from Seabury Divinity School. The young men were assisted by Miss Mary Whitney, Miss Anna Ten Broke, and Miss Margaret Poole, who gave both instrumental and vocal numbers. Mrs. C.A. Poole of Seabury chaperoned the party, and they were delightfully entertained at the rectory of Holy Cross Church in Dundas. And it was a nice benefit for the Dundas Church. Now, we had to get Dundas in there for you. But
Yeah,
cool to see that this Seabury Divinity School located in Faribault was also traveling across the county.
yeah, and I imagine for the people of Dundas that was a big deal. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, from Faribault, they're coming from Faribault.
They're coming from the Divinity School.
Yeah.
So that would be quite interesting. Of course, New Year's are also a time for reflection, and oftentimes that might mean grief as well. This headline has answered his last alarm. Harry, one of the splendid black horses of the team belonging to the Faribault Fire Department, has answered his last call to duty and made his last run. He was taken sick with indigestion, and while everything possible was done, he died to eliminate the suffering. He died New Year's Day after 2 days' sickness, faithful to his last. Harry was 14 years of age and was purchased 7 years ago by the city fire department and was valued at $300. So that is at least 5, more likely 6 concerts given by the Fleckenstein Stephen Orchestra. He was a fine animal, quick to learn and always ready to respond to a call. He was not a friendly horse and made friends with no one, not even with his driver, who has been with him constantly. So I don't know how he is. I guess he's a fine animal. Yes, they did not call him a kind animal. He's fine, like a good animal. He had a quiet dignity about him that was always evident, seeming to say, quote, "I am on duty, helping to protect your homes and my city, and I'm proud of it," end quote. Harry was always willing to do his share of the work and just a little more, and much sorrow has been expressed among the boys of the department who knew and loved the faithful horse. While the new team is being purchased, his place is being filled temporarily by a horse belonging to Chief Kelly. Rest in peace, Harry.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Harry, it sounded like he had a tough exterior, but a heart of gold.
Yeah, definitely. Faribault's bravest, that the horses on the fire department.
I think they should bring in a horse again, not to do anything, because obviously you don't.
Yeah.
Nowadays we have better technology than a horse to handle fires. But I think it sounds like Harry was a really lovely character,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think it would hurt to have a horse somewhere. I mean, I guess you need a stable and stuff, but aren't they renovating that whole area anyways, where they were going to? Or I would say just you don't need a whole barn, just enough stable for one mascot horse.
Sure.
Who can revive that Harry spirit. I would just pitch that to the city council.
Yeah, I think we could. We've got a staff. I know Northfield is mostly volunteer. Faribault does have firefighter staff. Maybe next time that they need to grow their numbers due to more population, instead of a person, get a horse named Harry. Quick question before we move on to 1909. You said there's more effective ways to put out a fire than a horse.
Yeah. Better technology.
In your mind, what is the horse doing in the extinguishing process?
It's a great question, Sam. And I would say the number one, and I say this to all horses when they ask me, what's the number one way I can put myself to work stopping fires?
Mm-hmm.
And it is carrying buckets of water.
Oh, sure.
And so I would say you got 2 buckets of water, and you've got what I'm seeing is a bendy,
like a saddlebag.
Well, yeah, a saddlebag, but for some reason what I was imagining was like a bendy stick that is precariously balanced over the saddle on the back of the horse. And that inevitably tips over when the horse goes over a trot into like a canter,
Hmm.
and and then has to come right back to the watering area to refill those buckets, get it back on the horse, and then it becomes the job of several young fire boys to keep the horse calm so that those water buckets don't tip over while you're bringing the horse to the fire.
So you're imagining a pretty substantial fireboy to horse ratio here.
I'm seeing at least 2 to 1. Yeah. But if you get past, I mean, one of the classic problems is that when you get past 5 fireboys per horse, for example, that starts to be so many fireboys that it sort of scares the horse. It upsets
Sure.
the horse. And then again, you've got that tipping the water bucket problem.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
like that. How does that old saying go?
it's one fireboy isn't enough. 5 water boys scares the horse into tipping the bucket, and two fireboys is just right for keeping the horse's demeanor at the right level, vis-a-vis keeping those water buckets stable. I think that's the saying.
Yeah, I think my grandma had that cross stitched above the sink. Um, I'm regretting not editing this now, but okay, we're moving on to 19.
Yeah, right, right. Because if you were going to be editing this, then you could put in a visual of that horse and the water buckets and the boys and all that.
Yes,
I
that's what I meant.
But I mean, this video isn't going to have that kind of budget.
No, no. Um, More bowling in 1909. So we've got a team from Faribault went to Albert Lea New Year's Day to play the Albert Lea team. They were defeated by a small score. Uh, that's it.
Okay, that's too
Um,
bad.
yeah.
Right here.
But the state bowling association did decide to join the National League, so that's big for Minnesota bowlers. In 1912, we have a slightly more useful weather report.
Still thinking
Snow.
about. I'm sorry.
You're still thinking about the horses? Is it because of the
I'm getting
horses?
back into. I need to get back into the mindset here.
Well,
So
if
playing with that 1912. What's happening in 1912?
yes, well, if Harry, God rest his soul, were still with us, it would be a tough day in New Year's Day 1912. Nearly a foot of snow fell during 36 hours preceding New Year's. Roads were blocked, trains were delayed, and was at a standstill in general. The greatest fury of the storm striking through over the Dakotas and Montana. The temperature dropped to 13 below on New Year's Day, and in some places even to 15 and 18 below. During the day, it warmed up, but with the setting sun, it began to lower again and has been exceedingly cold ever since. Uh, there were colder places than Faribault on New Year's Day. Winnipeg having a 22 below temperature. It was cold enough, though, in Faribault, and when folks began emerging from their homes at 8 a.m. yesterday, they felt the sting of a biting temperature, the likes of which the city has not had since last February. Now, that is how you report the weather.
Absolutely. And I mean, just imagine the wind chill on those temps.
And insulation being what it was. I mean, surprisingly effective for the times, but nowhere near what we have now.
No, that sounds like a doozy.
Yes. But it is interesting that how much winters have changed in terms of extremes. Like there's always cold days and there's always warm days. But honestly, if you only, in winter, if you, the last day below zero or the last day at like -18 was in February, that's not bad.
Yeah.
If you're getting through the rest of both that March and then November, December, uh, without getting that cold. That's pretty good. I would take that.
What was the most recent? Has it been below zero yet this season?
Yes, you wouldn't know this, of course, being in Queens, but yeah, we had a 2 weeks ago at the time of recording. It got pretty cold, and we got at least I think a foot of snow here. I mean, I snowblowed like 3 times in order to keep things clear. Otherwise, it was just keep continuing to build up. So, but that was the first like really strong snow that we got this year.
Okay.
What's it been like in New York?
Just a touch of snow. maybe a couple weeks ago. Otherwise, not really dipping below 20 to
Nice.
30. Warm sea breezes keeping us happy here in the balmy port city of New York.
Yeah, the Atlantic, famously warm, practically the Bahamas.
Bahamian.
In 1913, where I think this might be my only Northfield story. During the month of January, there were no arrests in Northfield, indicating a state of law observance, which is very unusual. Apparently, New Year's resolutions have had a good effect.
That is incredible.
Yeah,
It's that's all verbatim from the newspaper.
that is
By the
verbatim.
way, was this reported in the Faribault newspaper or in a Northfield
I
newspaper?
think this was reported in a Faribault newspaper.
I thought as much. I sensed as much.
Yes,
But
yes.
I mean, Northfielders get wild on New Year's. It's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were still quite a few teetotalers, so makes it a little easier. Uh, yeah, but yeah, they wouldn't put that in the Northfield paper because that's just asking for trouble.
Yeah.
But in Faribault, it's just bragging, or it's like tall poppy syndrome. Uh, so
Paul Poppy
you haven't
syndrome.
heard of tall poppy? I don't have time to get into that. Look at it's a
Yeah.
it's a British cultural thing. And then it also extends to like Australia and stuff like that. Anyway, 1914. These are just some familiar names, which I thought was really neat. Mr. and Mrs. Touzenot of Faribault entertained the Touzenot and Salmon families at a dinner party New Year's Day. Uh, that's just fun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Um, Also in 1914, the governor announced around New Year's the appointments to the various boards and commissions at the state level, and famous local artist Grace McKinstry was reappointed to by the governor to the board of the State Arts Society, which is a precursor to the State Arts Board that we have today.
Cool.
Yeah. So Grace McKinstry, world-renowned local artist, daughter of actually A.W. McKinstry, who was, I think he held the newspaper after Rodney Mott gave it up. I think
Right.
that's how the lineage goes. Either that or it was a couple. He took on the same paper that Rodney Mott ran. So again, same circle of people, but uh, she grew up and went a different direction, but also was a writer. And in her travels through Europe, in her art career, she would write back. So there's quite a few. If you go to the Rice County Historical Society, by the way, this whole thing is a fundraiser for the Rice County Historical Society. So if you're enjoying this, please donate to the Rice County Historical Society. Probably could have
So
mentioned, huh?
I would have tried harder on my horse joke if I knew we were raising money.
I Raising money is a strong word. It's not like we have a goal. It's just if you either really like this or you want this to be better, give money to the Rice County Historical Society, who is not paying for this, to be clear.
Right.
Um, but they could pay us to stop. Uh, anyway, at the Rice County Historical Society, a lot of her paintings on display, and there's a book of her travels that you can check out. I highly recommend it. Um, here's a local fraternity that we still have in town. The Faribault Elks dedicate their new lodge home on New Year's Day. So they had a grand ball, a banquet. It was a red letter day for the Elks in the city. So that's just fun. The day was rather stormy, and the number of visitors from other cities were not as numerous as expected there would be. The Elks had open house from 10 o'clock in the forenoon, morning, until there must have been a cutoff from morning to forenoon.
I bet there were a lot of arguments about that, probably on dating apps. People probably
Yeah,
there.
that's one of the prompts is what do you call the time before noon? Uh,
Controversial hot take. Forenoon starts at 9 a.m.
yeah.
Something like that.
Well, you'll never guess who played at the Elks Lodge for their grand opening. Do you remember the name?
Fleckenstein Steppen.
That's right. They're playing again. This is 10 years later.
That's great. Good for them.
Yeah. They're keeping it going. Um They had a lot of really good food. It sounds like um, something called Blue Points, celery olives.
What?
I don't know. Wafers, breast of fowl. So they could not verify it was all the same bird. Actually, we were talking earlier before this call about your inability to identify different birds. Maybe you just need to start calling everything, any edible bird is fowl. And if you
Yeah,
want, any bird is edible.
I think I think that's true. I think that's true. They say puffin is a little stringy, but other than that, I think any bird you could eat.
I will stick to the Neapolitan ice cream, and salted almonds also listed in the catering, cigars.
Yeah. I would
So
say honestly, that sounds like a terrible dinner. Well, wafers can never be one of the top billed items at your dinner.
I think okay.
The wafers should be not even mentioned. They should be, they're just there and people eat them, when they don't have space for anything else, but it shouldn't be listed as one of the main, that was like number three food item in that
I
list.
think I need to defend DF Skinner, who is the caterer here. I didn't read all of them. Two
Okay.
so it goes in order, I think, from uh appetizer or mousse bouche to get the palate going. Like it went there through the main course to the dessert, and the final dessert, of course, being cigars.
Yeah.
Um, to be fair, I'm going to read you through the course, and I want you to give a or a on every item
Okay.
um, to see. So blue points.
No clue what that is. I'm assuming it's a cheese of some kind because of the blue cheese, the wonderful cheese of Faribault.
It's not spelled like blue cheese.
Oh, it's just spelled like the color.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. No,
And
no, I got nothing then. I can't. I'll say yes because that's fun.
okay, celery olives.
Honestly, I've been getting into olives recently.
Yeah.
Um, I think they're pretty good, so I'm going to give that a thumbs up. And I even like celery, so that's two fine things. However, those things are combined, it's probably okay. So I'm going to give that a thumbs up.
Did you consider that it might just be like a celery stalk fermented in a way to make it taste like an olive?
I hadn't considered that specifically, but I've got no qualms with that.
I'm betting it's either olives in a thing of celery or they stick a little sliver of celery into an olive instead of a pimento.
That sounds okay.
Anyway, wafers, we know your opinion on wafers.
Yeah, big thumbs down.
Breast of fowl,
Thumbs up.
pomme de terre petit pois.
I'm at a loss. I'll be honest.
Right.
I sounds like cherry. I heard the word cherry in there, and I'm kind of mixed on cherries, so I'm gonna give that a thumbs down. Also,
It was terre. I don't know how I don't know French. I'm just guessing on these things.
puts it in the American way. I think I've got a better chance of understanding it like that.
Pomme de terre petit pois.
Poise. I got nothing.
Cranberry marmalade.
I've never had marmalade. I don't like it that much. Thumbs down.
Salad.
Well, I mean, that's a wide genre
I
here.
know.
And they had food. Again, I guess that's like saying they had breast of fowl. I'll give it a thumbs up to appease my mother.
There you go. Uh,
Obi-Wan.
Roman punch Saint Julian claret. What's a
I
claret?
don't know what a claret is, but I know what a Ronin is. Those were the wandering soldiers.
Roman.
Oh, not the landless samurai of
No.
the pre-Meiji period. Okay. Roman what?
Roman punch Saint Julian claret.
Okay, I like punch. Punch is good.
Yes. I wonder if that's a cocktail.
It sounds like we're getting to that point in the night where it would be
Yes,
after.
because now we have the Neapolitan ice cream.
Okay.
Ooh,
Yeah,
ooh.
alternate. But obviously, I mean, it's just chocolate and vanilla ice cream. Nobody's eating the strawberry ice cream.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
So I approve of Neapolitan ice cream, but I mean, let's be realistic. And we could have just made it chocolate and vanilla ice cream, but that's fine. Just call it a twist.
cake coffee is what's written here.
Sounds good. I mean, would prefer coffee cake, but I'm a little concerned about that ordering of the words. But assuming it's just coffee cake, I would eat that. Yeah.
Yes. Bent's water crackers.
Sounds suspiciously like a wafer to me.
It sounds a lot like a wafer.
I'm a little concerned about that, so I'm going to give that a thumbs down.
You might change your mind because this is moving in a charcuterie direction. Because now we just have cheese.
It just says
It
cheese.
just says cheese.
Okay, so they when they sent out their reporter to report on, they chose a guy who was had no clue what he was eating and was really embarrassed about asking questions. However, he did for some reason he knew that weird French food
Yep.
and Roman claret. So he has a really specific niche interest in some kinds of food, and with everything
Probably
else,
labels. When it's a mixed drink, there's a label.
oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So he's probably seeing that, and then with everything else, he's just like definitely a salad.
Yeah.
That's definitely the breast of some kind of bird for sure.
Yeah. And the Elks were just thinking these yokels know what cheese is.
Yeah.
Because after that, now we have salted almonds.
Okay.
So I do like the idea of this reporter. I do like the idea of this reporter going off taste. Like, okay, I can tell this is a salted almond. I can tell this is a pomme de terre petite pois. This is some kind of cheese.
Yeah.
And then cigars. I've never tried a cigar before. It's on the bucket list. I've tried other methods of tobacco delivery, but I've never tried a cigar. How about you?
I've had one. I've puffed on one cigar.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a fine experience. I wouldn't. I mean, honestly, if I was in charge of your bucket list, I mean, I would say, get to the other things first.
Get to the pomme de terre petite pois.
Get to the petite pois first. I didn't think it was that interesting.
Tobacco didn't super agree with me either, so it's not something that I'm not going to seek it out. But if I'm in an occasion where it's handed to me and the moment feels right, I'm going to follow my heart.
It was the last day of college. I had a cigar.
There you go. I never had a last day of college. Anyway, you had the salad, and I am making you look to appease your mother, and I am doing the opposite by reminding her that I didn't.
There you go. Great.
The opening must have been a success for the Elks because in 1917 they had another celebration. Once again, there was a large attendance. Fleckenstein Stepan furnished the music. They didn't share the menu.
Damn. Well, I mean, they didn't let that guy back, and they said you're not allowed to report on our food anymore.
Yeah, that guy got sacked.
They're like, we served beef and cheese sticks last year, and your guy thought it was chicken and cherry petite.
Yeah, it's just one big charcuterie board.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we move into an era that we have covered a little bit more extensively, and that's the 1910s. A few years ago, we produced a documentary. You did a lot of really wonderful research on the influenza pandemic, also known as the Spanish flu during that time, and how that intersected with World War I. So here we are in the midst of the First World War in January 1918. There was a distribution of New Year's remembrances from home for the Minnesota troops at brigade headquarters on Wednesday afternoon. A portion went to the 136th. So an important part of our time is as the United States is getting into the war in Europe, that now that is being factored in. And as people are celebrating, as people are grieving, surprisingly, I did not find reference of influenza as it relates to New Year's, but there was, of course, plenty about the war and soldiers, whether you were fretting about a loved one, a son or a brother or a friend or a neighbor, going overseas, or if you, in fact, have already lost someone in the process, because people got sick before they even left Europe. I mean, that's part of why the pandemic happened then was because of the war and the disease. Um, and so you might lose a family member while they're in training at a camp because disease simply ran rampant. And I'm betting that you're looking up to see if Eddie Zaman was in the 136th.
I'm not actively looking that up right now, but I am curious
Yeah.
who was.
Okay. I took a gamble that I could see your eyes moving and you were scrolling through something. Are you looking at horses or food?
No, 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 no. I'm just locked in
Okay,
on
you're
this.
locked in. Good.
But he certainly could have been at that time. I mean that kind of sounds right. I mean it's not. I don't think Faribault contributed to more than a couple,
Mhm.
regiments. I imagine all the local boys would have been part of the same company. So they, I certainly if it wasn't Eddie, it was someone with a very similar story. Eddie Zaman was the one of the main people we looked into in that documentary Sam was referencing a few moments ago. Um, yeah, I mean, the one of the theories about how the Spanish flu started is that it started, I think, in Camp David in Kansas. I don't know if it's Camp David. It's that's a different place.
That's a different famous place, but yes, one of the theories is it started domestically here.
Yeah. But this we've been talking about gatherings this whole time and the um, celebration and joy of the new year. But for much of history, I mean, and one of the things that people have always had to keep in mind is that any kind of gathering also brings disease. And very few events in human history bring people together in a more systematic way than industrial warfare. And so, as soon as that war started, people were aware that it was going to be not only bringing the characteristic bloodshed of warfare, but also the disease that came along at that time with any mass congregation of people. And I mean, that's especially on people's minds in winter. So that's for this whole time. The interesting thing about any period of history before, the 1950s or whatever, is that these gatherings are moments where people are looking forward to the joy, they're understanding the joy, but there's always that understanding that uh, serious disease could be around the corner. And that's that, like we talked about at the beginning, the juxtaposition of the darkest day of the year with this taking the opportunity to celebrate life.
Yeah.
That's always, I think, part of what makes this period of the year so profound to people is that it's so near to that.
Yeah. One of the ideas of the solstice or Yule in Norse mythology was that was the day that those who died in the last year moved on to the next plane. So you better stay inside. You better stay gathered with friends and family because you might accidentally get caught up and taken along with those souls. But that would certainly have been a day where you were thinking about those you lost in the last year and their journey that they were on that day. As families in 1918 would be considering, think about how much the world would have changed. There's, of course, more communication than ever in human history across continents, but it's not until the last year that we look at. I think it was New Year's Eve ticking over from 1924 to 1925 when one of the first, if not the first, radio broadcast shared between Europe and America. I mean, where you are literally, for them, basically instantaneously hearing a voice from another continent and just how much change there is in a single lifetime. Like, because we started in 1857, a lot of people then, especially children born in Faribault in Rice County in 1857, are still celebrating New Year's in 1918. Think about how much that world has changed. Uh, it's really miraculous, and we'll get to this a little bit more. But I really, as we are now in the era of World War I, to really consider. We didn't talk about the context of the Civil War, of the Industrial Revolution, but the jump from that first one in 1856 that we read to the next one that we read, which was 1898. I mean, how much the world changed in that time, how much America and Minnesota changed in that time. And for me, anyways, we're living through storied times right now. Every year is a year of reflection because every year has been so distinctly different for the past 5 years. And that's been, and that happens to be coinciding with, you and I growing into adulthood, and living independently, and experiencing, everything that life has to offer. But it also has been world historic events every year of our adulthood, where you can almost feel the ground shake. And that is exactly what these folks in 1918 would be feeling as well. There's some people who wouldn't have felt the ground shake because they were not on ground in 1918 on New Year's. Two friends, Melvin and Alan, skated from Faribault to Northfield on New Year's Day. They said the ice was solid all the way, except for a short distance below the Dundas Dam. They made the trip in 2 hours. Several boys started on the trip, but the others turned back. So, I don't know if I've seen the Cannon River in my lifetime frozen enough to walk on, nonetheless skate all the way to Northfield.
I mean, yeah, it used to be super duper common. I know, say in downtown Northfield, there's all kinds of pictures
Yeah.
of people skating and playing on the Cannon River in icy winter.
There's a gorgeous mural. I think it's on the old Peterson Art Furniture building, now where 10,000 Drops Distillery is, of skating on the Straight River, which of course connects then to the Cannon. Yeah, it seems like a great pastime. I would love to have a consistent enough temperatures in our winters to experience that. But yes, I thought that was a slightly cheerier note to end our 1918 New Year's on. But we're getting close to the end here. We haven't talked a lot about businesses, but in 1922, the Faribault Chamber of Commerce came together and decided that it would be closed for Memorial Day, like that they would encourage businesses, so all the members would follow this. They would close stores on Memorial Day, July 4th, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Day. So before there was a whole lot of federal holidays and bank holidays, this was that local control of every business in Faribault, to be fair. And there's things throughout history of all the grocers in town have come to an agreement on their own to close on New Year's. It was a big deal around this time, I believe, when rural mail carriers got the day off, and that mail would not be delivered on New Year's. So it really went industry by industry, and in this case, town by town, and in terms of what the expectation would be, until we got to those federal holidays. So thought that would be interesting to touch on. We're essentially at the end here, and I want to finish with focusing on one life. We've talked a lot about different events. We've talked about the human story that is reflecting on a new year, reflecting on a change in the seasons, change in the calendar. And I want to reflect just how much change there is in a single lifetime. And I'm going to focus on a gentleman named John Lick. I'm going to read his obituary from 1924. He died on December 20th, so the day before the solstice. So his family would have been, very much in a strong state of grieving as they were going from 1924 to 1925. I'll read the obituary, and then I have a few other notes that I picked up from other newspaper articles. The entire Faribault community was last night shocked to learn of the sudden death of John Lick, for almost 50 years a resident of this city. Mr. Lick died suddenly at his home on 4th Street and 5th Avenue after an accident in which he suffered a fractured neck. Mr. Lick returned to his home from downtown about 6 o'clock and started to go into the basement to look after the furnace. When almost at the bottom of the stairs, he fell, pitching forward and striking his head against a meter fastened to the wall. Members of the family at once hurried to his aid, but he passed away almost instantly. Death was caused by a broken neck, who was immediately, which was determined by the doctor who was called by the family. The blow inflicted injuries to the skull, but they were not severe enough to cause instant death. Mr. Lick, so it was the injuries to the neck that killed him nearly instantly. Mr. Lick had been in the best of health. The news of his death came as a shock to the entire city, and many who had seen him downtown only a few minutes before refused to believe the reports that he passed away. Mr. Lick served 17 years as a member of the Faribault police force, being chief of police for 6 years. He was known to a large number of Faribault residents, all of whom will be greatly saddened to learn of his untimely death. Mr. Lick also served as deputy sheriff under Sheriff George Mosher and was for a number of years county game warden. He retired from the police force in 1919 after having served as chief of police for 6 years. Funeral arrangements were incomplete this forenoon's back. Members of the family awaiting word from relatives in the West, but the funeral services will probably be held Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock at the residence and at 2:30 from the German Lutheran Church. John G. Lick was born in Goodhue County on March 20th, 1867. To put that into context, he was born at a time when the Alexander Faribault was still running a Dakota refugee camp here. The Civil War, still a very fresh wound. The South still rebuilding. The country had experienced its first presidential assassination, a series of both personal violence, unlike the country had ever seen, and wide-scale violence in a very bloody civil war. He was born into that world, and he died after being able to experience telegrams. He would have been able to hear some early telephones. He had an automobile that was actually stolen the year prior. How much the world changed in that single short life. I digress. He came to Faribault with his parents as a boy. Since then, he has resided in Faribault continuously. On November 21st, 1891, he was united in marriage to Amelia Mentz, who survives him. He is also survived by 3 daughters, 3 grandchildren, 2 sisters, 1 brother, and a number of other relatives. His mother-in-law is also left to mourn his death. His wife and I believe one of his daughters was home when he passed away. Mr. Lick was a member of the German Lutheran Church of Faribault, and during the many years of his life here, he always took an active part in its work. For 20 years, he was president of the Fraternity, Sick, and Benefit Association of the church, taking lead part in its activities. He was also prominent in the affairs of the city, serving for 17 years as a member of the police force. He was first appointed to the force in 1898, at that first letter that we read in this era, serving continuously for 4 years. In 1903, he was again appointed patrolman, serving until 1910. In 1913, he was appointed chief of police by Mayor George Smith, serving in his capacity for 6 years, when he retired in 1919. During his 11 years as patrolman, he served under several chiefs. He was first named police patrolman during the administration of Mayor Donald Grant. Mr. Lick was chief of police during the first flu epidemic, and during those trying days, he took an active part in assisting those who were suffering with the disease, accompanying the city nurse on a large number of her calls to the homes of the sick. At the time of his death, Mr. Lick was 57 years and 9 months of age. News of his sudden passing cast a gloom over the pre-Christmas preparations in Faribault, and many residents of the city went to their work today saddened by this tragic event. So a few more things about John Lick. He was a policeman, so there's lots of reports of him returning stolen property, catching thieves. There's a lot of work in anti-homeless work, anti-vagrancy work that he was doing. But there's also reports of his personal life. He played in a local baseball league. He was an outdoorsman. He and his wife went camping. He was a fisherman. There were several stories about fishing parties that he was part of. He had several scares through his life with serious illness, like I mentioned before, quarantining with scarlet fever. In 1912, he purchased a motion picture license and showed movies for a few months and then sold the business that same year. Um, as mentioned, he was a member of the German Lutheran Church, and yet in 1918, he oversaw the registration of German-born residents, including presumably himself, his family, as they were of German heritage. Um, but you do wonder how much that decision. Now he was older at this time, uh, but you wonder how that might have impacted his relationship with the work he was doing. And he retired the following year. He walked his daughter down the aisle in 1920 in that German Lutheran church, marrying Louis Sellner, who grew up in Faribault. Um, and in 1921, his second daughter was married in their home. Uh, so he was in that next chapter of life, of retirement, of uh, being with his family. There's lots of reports. Louis Sellner and John's daughter moved to another part of the state, but there were frequent reports of uh, John and his wife going to visit that family, their family coming to visit them. This man was very clearly close with not just his children, but his cousins and siblings. Uh, and now this is that event that the community would be reeling from as they were coming into that new year. I do have a final kind of scripted section that I would like to look at, but do you have any thoughts before or questions before we go to that?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. One of them is just thinking about that house and how if you walk past that house, it looked like any other house on that street.
Mhm.
And um, and that's our experience going past any of the places where people live and move and have their lives. But to think of for his I think his second daughter you mentioned, um, just what that house must have represented as the place where she was married, and then within a span of years, in that same place, her father has a horrific accident and dies suddenly and violently for his time, and um, how so many houses that are just buildings have that unbelievable emotional resonance to someone.
Mhm.
Uh, and uh, when a town, you know, lives for a long time, when a house can go from one generation to another, um, it accumulates those stories. And that's true of a community at large, that it's not just made up of the people who live there now. Um, it's also made up of the stories of the people who were in those same places, who lived in those houses before, who walked those streets. And for all those people, in addition to the people today, those streets had meaning, had changing meanings over the course of their lives. Those houses, those buildings, the river, um, it all has uh, and had such deep meaning to every individual person.
Yeah, yeah. That's where that family was grieving. The community was grieving about 100 years ago, as 1924 was ticking over into 1925. John, in his short life, he lived in unique times, but more distinct times certainly lay ahead on the horizon for his widow, his daughters, and the children that his daughters would raise. Um, the children who would know the year 1924 as the year they uh, lost the grandfather that they didn't get to meet. On December 31st, as the family, while also uh, doing funeral preparations and preparing, Or actually, the funeral would have already passed at this point if their plans came together as expected. Reeling from that, the family gathered and would have likely remained gathered for the new year. On December 31st, 1924, not 2 weeks after John's death, on the other side of the world, fascist militiamen in Italy, under the direction of dictator Benito Mussolini, ransacked, burned, and otherwise pulverized opposition media. On the same day, Julius Schaub was released from prison in Germany, where he immediately resumed his work as chief advisor to Adolf Hitler. Families in Rice County and around the world may not have registered these events as they rang in the new year of 1925, but they would come to know them, just as generations before came to know the names of leaders and criminals in their time. John's children and his future grandchildren would certainly have their lives impacted by these events, likely completely foreign to them as they were in their grief in 1924. As we today look to the new year 2025, we may not know which footnotes in the newspaper foreshadow future events, but for certain they are there, and history will record how we responded or what we were preoccupied with in our own lives while these things are taking place. To end, going even further back, Rodney Mott wrote an address to the readers in 1857. With this number, this edition of the newspaper, we bring you a New Year's welcome. God has kindly spared our lives to exchange holiday greetings in this beautiful territory. Minnesota, of course, not yet a state. Our friends are here from every state. A glorious ride of emigration has rolled upon us in the past year, spreading itself over our broad plains, skirting our bright rivers, and encircling our beautiful lakes. As we hear the rumbling wheels of the old year, hurrying to swell the ages past, let us unitedly and anew dedicate ourselves to liberty, to temperance and free schools. The conscience of doing good will secure to us a happy year. And with that, I encourage you to do good by donating to the Rice County Historical Society, who makes preserving and telling these stories possible. Logan, do you have anything else you'd like to share or reflect on before we depart?
It was an absolute pleasure to join you today and talking about local history. And yeah, I'll reiterate your call to support the great institution that is most devoted to making that a continuing goal of the community.
Absolutely. Logan, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Sam.